Welcome to our Lebanon channel. Kadisha Valley, also romanized as the Qadisha Valley and also known as the Kadisha Gorge or Wadi Kadisha, French, Wadi Qadisha, is a gorge that lies within the Beshareh and Zata districts of the North Governorate of Lebanon. The valley was carved by the Kadisha River, also known as the Nahr Abu Ali, when it reaches Tripoli. Kadisha means holy in Aramaic, and the valley, sometimes called the Holy Valley. It has sheltered Christian monastic communities for many centuries. The valley is located at the foot of Mount al-Makmal in northern Lebanon. The integrity of the valley is at risk due to encroachment of human settlements, illegal building and inconsistent conservation activity. Although it is not yet on the UNESCO in danger list, there have been warnings that continued violations may lead to this step. Geography. The holy river, Nahr Qadisha, runs through the valley for 35 kilometers from its source in a cave grotto a little way below the forest of the Cedars of God. The sides of the valley are steep cliffs that contain many caves, often at more than 1,000 meters and all difficult of access. The most scenic section of the valley stretches for approximately 20 kilometers between Bishari, the hometown of Khalil Gibran, and Tirzah. It is here also that the holy river, Nahr Qadisha, flows, its source being in a sacred mountain celebrated in the scriptures. The Cedars of God. The Kadisha Valley is near the forest of the Cedars of God, survivors of the ancient cedars of Lebanon, the most highly prized building materials of the ancient world. The forest is said to contain 375 individual trees, 2 claim to be over 3,000 years old, 10 over 1,000 years, and the remainder at least centuries old. The Lebanon cedar, Cedrus Libani, is described in ancient works on botany as the oldest tree in the world. It was admired by the Israelites, who brought it to their land to build the first and the second temples in Jerusalem. Historical sources report that the famous cedar forests were beginning to disappear at the time of Justinian in the 6th century AD. History. The Qadisha Valley's many natural caves have been used as shelters and for burials back as far as the Paleolithic period. The R.C. Hauka cave, in particular, near Hawka, Lebanon, has yielded archaeological items indicating Paleolithic, Roman, and medieval periods of use. Since the early centuries of Christianity, the Holy Valley has served as a refuge for those in search of solitude. Historians believe that the Kadisha Valley has had monastic communities continuously since the earliest years of Christianity. It was also at times a destination for Muslim mystics, or Sufis, who also visited it for meditation and solitude. Early Christian communities fleeing persecution found refuge in the Kadisha. Among these groups were the Jacobites, Syriac Orthodox, Melkites, Byzantine Catholic, Nestorians, Armenians, and even Ethiopians. The Maronites, however, are the dominant Christian group in the valley. From the late 7th century, Maronites fled to the valley from their original areas of settlement in the Levante. At that time, they feared persecution from the Jacobites, who were non-Chalcedonian, and who persecuted Chalcedonian Maronites, and from Islamic attacks. Maronite settlement intensified in the 10th century following the destruction of the monastery of Saint Maron. The Maronite monks established their new center at Canabin, in the heart of the Qadisha, and monasteries quickly spread over the surrounding hills. Early Maronite settlement in the valley combined both community and eremitic life. The Mamluk sultans Baybars and Kalaun led campaigns in 1268 and 1283, respectively, against the fortress caves, monasteries, and the surrounding villages. Despite these attacks, the Deir Canabin monastery was to become the seat of the Maronite patriarch in the 15th century and to remain so for 500 years. In the 17th century, the Maronite monks' reputation for piety was such that many European poets, historians, geographers, politicians, and clergy visited and even settled in the valley. The first printing press in the Middle East was founded in 1585 at the monastery of Kaujaya in the Kadisha Valley, and in 1610 printed its first book, the Book of Psalms, in the Syriac language. It used Syriac characters. Also, this printing press was the first to print in Arabic language. World Heritage Site. In 1998, UNESCO added the valley to the list of World Heritage Sites because of its importance as the site of some of the earliest Christian monastic settlements in the world, and its continued example of early Christian faith. Christian monasticism in the valley. The Kadisha Holy Valley is the site of some of the most ancient Christian monastic communities of the Middle East. The valley's natural caves, being comfortless, scattered, and difficult to access, provided monks and hermits sufficiently isolated and inhospitable conditions to live out Christian solitude, contemplation, and devotion. Many of the caves and irregularities in the cliffsides were adapted to serve as individual dwellings, cells, chapels, and monasteries, and such buildings were further carved out of the cliff faces of the valley. Some have interiors covered with frescoes and facades. Around the caves there are terraced fields made by the hermits for growing grain, grapes, and olives. While there are numerous monasteries in the valley, there are several main monastic complexes. The Canabin Monastery. The Canabin Monastery, Deir Canabin, is on the northeast side of the Qadisha Valley. It is the oldest of the Maronite monasteries, although its foundation is often attributed to the Emperor Theodosius the Great in 375 AD, it is more likely that it was established by a disciple of Saint Theodosius the Cenobite. For the most part it is cut into the rock cliffside, monastic cells, church, cloister, and accommodation for travelers. Canabin used to be the see of the Maronite Patriarch. The Monastery of Saint Anthony of Qaujaya. The Monastery of Qaujaya, Deir Mar Antonios Qaujaya, sits on the opposite flank of the Kadisha from Canabin Monastery. Tradition has its foundation in the 4th century by Saint Hilarion, in honor of the Egyptian anchorite, Saint Anthony the Great, though the earliest documentary records date back only to around 1000 AD. It was destroyed in the 16th century but quickly restored. It comprises a corridor, meeting room, and chapel, with a mill and a number of hermitages cut into the rock nearby. The Monastery of Our Lady of Hawka. Sede Hawka is situated at an altitude of 1,150 meters between Canabin and Qaujaya monasteries, at the base of an enormous cave. It was founded in the late 13th century by villagers from Hawka. The hermitage appears to have been located on a wide platform at mid-level, where there is a water reservoir fed by channels. The upper level, only accessible by ladder, is a cave some 47 meters long, where the wealth of medieval pottery and arrowheads that have been found suggests its use as a refuge. Traces of fortifications have also been found in the RC Hauka cave at 1,170 meters altitude. Archaeological finds show that this cave was in use in Paleolithic, Roman, and medieval times. The Monastery of Mar Sarkis. The Monastery of Mar Sarkis, also called Ras al-Nar, overlooks Eden, Kfrsgab, Bain and Hadith el-Jebeh. Given its exceptional location overlooking the valley at an altitude of 1,500 meters, the monastery is called the Watchful Eye of Qadisha. It is dedicated to Saints Sarkis and Bacchos, Saints Sergius and Bacchus. The name Ras al-Nar means the top of the river, as it is in the vicinity of the Mar Sarkis source, the main contributor to the Qelanchie River which joins the Canabin River in the valley. The first church of Saints Sarkis and Bacchos was built in the mid-8th century AD on the ruins of a Canaanite temple dedicated to a god of agriculture. Next to it, another church dedicated to Our Lady was constructed in 1198 AD. Several buildings were added from 1404 till 1690, when Patriarch Estephan Douhi restored part of the buildings. The Monastery of Mar Lashar. Mar Lashar, or Saint Elisha, mentioned first in the 14th century, is shared by two communities, a Maronite solitary order and the Barefoot Carmelite order. It consists of 3 or 4 small cells, a refectory, and some offices. The communal church includes 4 chapels cut into the rock face. Other monasteries. Other monastic establishments in the Qadisha are the Monastery of Mar Gergis, with the Chapel of Mar Chalita, the Monastery of Mar Yohanna, the Monastery of Mar Aban, with the Hermitage of Mar Sarkis, and the Monastery of Mar Maura, Eden and others. There is another group of monasteries in the adjoining Hadchit Valley, Wadi Hular. These were founded by Ethiopian monophysite monks expelled from the neighboring town of Eden and occupied by them before their communities scattered elsewhere. They include the Hermitage monastery complexes of Deir es Salab, Mar Antonios, Mar Samane, and Mar Assia, along with the isolated chapels of Mar Bona and Mar Shmuna. Thank you for watching. Like, share, and subscribe.